Momentum, in its simplest definition, means to move. And in whitewater, we are constantly in a state of motion. Despite this, we are generally not conscious of how our momentum is moving the majority of the time. True boat control is achieved when we can read the momentum of the current, pick our desired point B, and add our own momentum to the currents to move through to our desired destination. There are 4 general states of momentum for our kayak. We can spin, move, slide, or carve. And we also have the state of no momentum, floating. Each have their own effective applications relative to the current. Let's start on flat water so we can get a sense of how our strokes affect each state of motion. Spin momentum, simply put, is making the boat spin in place and is achieved effectively through wider sweeping strokes or drawing strokes. The boat spins most effectively when the boat is kept flat. Moving, or directional momentum, is just that, moving forward, backward, or sideways, but evenly and in one direction. Directional momentum is commonly seen as varying, downstream, or cross-current momentum on the river. Sliding is a combination of both spin and directional momentum simultaneously. However, it starts from having directional momentum first. What happens is, as the boat is paddled and a wake is created, the wake essentially becomes a pivot point, and the remainder of the boat slides freely behind that. This is commonly experienced as uncontrolled veer, but also has a useful application. The direction of the slide is determined by your strokes in combination with the initial directional momentum. Sliding is a highly effective way to keep your angle adjusted perfectly while still moving forward without redirecting the momentum. Carving is not entirely different than sliding, except now instead of keeping the boat flat, we effectively change the shape of the boat relative to the water and add bite to the direction of the veer. If you keep the momentum up while carving, the boat continues to turn and redirect its momentum, and the harder you paddle, the harder the boat carves. This is commonly seen as the peel out and eddy turn on the river. So let's apply these concepts of momentum and talk about common problems with boat control while we run rivers, starting with eddy lines. Paddling from the eddy into the current, we generate our own momentum. As we paddle across the eddy line, we are now affected by the current's forces. In this case, the current will want to turn or spin us downstream if we do nothing to counter the current's force. However, if we counter with a stroke on the downstream side, we counter the current's force, and instead of resulting in a spin, we create directional momentum and drive into the current. If we create more force, then we spin upstream, and if we create less, then we spin down. It is important to note that spin momentum is an enemy to 2 things: stability and directional momentum. Same thing applies to coming into eddies from the current. As we drive across the current towards the eddy and across the eddy line, the boat wants to spin, this time upstream. But if we take a stroke on the upstream side or the inside of the spin, we counter the spin force and instead drive deeper into the eddy. We can look at eddy lines as being zones of transition that want to spin the boat. If our focus is to continue to drive our boat, then our goal is to minimize spin, and this will be achieved by well-timed and appropriate strokes. The thing that I commonly hear being taught to beginners is the idea of leaning downstream every time you leave an eddy, when honestly, we can leave eddies keeping the boat completely flat. The majority of the time, it is the most effective and efficient way to do so if we are not trying to turn downstream into the flow of the current. When we drop an edge into the current and our strokes add momentum, which now creates carving momentum. This is what most people commonly misunderstand as veer, and in reality, it is uncontrolled carving. Don't believe me? Try this straight line paddling drill sometime, starting in mild current with a variety of features. Your goal is to get your body, the center point of the kayak, to travel in a straight line from point A to point B. The most effective way to adjust your boat angle throughout the current to travel along that straight line is by leaving the boat flat. You are learning to effectively drive the boat and slide the boat through these zones of transition. It's not that edging doesn't have its effective application, but a good majority of the time, it is used as a band-aid for stability. And it's not that stability isn't gained by edging away from the current upstream either, but it's the concept that we also gain stability through directional momentum. Remember, spin momentum kills directional momentum. If folks instead use strokes that counter the spin of the current, the boat can be kept flat and driving in the desired direction. Pretty neat, huh? Okay, well, what if we made the mistake of dropping the edge and now the boat is carving out of control? How do I bring it back from the brink? Using a stern draw and mating the stroke with the inside edge will help to slide the stern back into place and back on your way. Now we know that keeping the boat flat and sliding has a lot of efficacy for boat control. But there are also times when it is not appropriate, and we actually need a grip on the water, which carving provides us. A great example is when you are trying to catch smaller eddies, or when you are trying to effectively accelerate your boat with minimal work. Watch the paddler here both with edge and without, and the effect it has on the momentum. When the boat is allowed to slide, the downstream momentum continues on. Whereas when the edge is dropped, the boat bites into the water and the momentum is redirected upstream with an additional stroke. In this example, the edge is essentially being used as a brake to slow the directional momentum. Edge can also be used to accelerate the boat, as in this example when the paddler generates momentum coming out of the eddy and taps into the downstream force by dropping an aggressive edge into the current, as well as taking a stroke on the downstream side to prevent a complete spin. Remember, spin is an enemy to directional momentum, but using spin with edge, we generate carving momentum, which then can be translated into directional momentum. So when is spinning effective? I don't want to lead you into believing there is never an effective application for a skill. After all, if it is possible to do in a kayak, then I'm always certain that there is an application. I use spins to adjust my angles, to redirect dramatically, and for recoveries. Sometimes it's just best to go with it. The important thing to remember from this lesson, though, is that spin and directional momentum don't exist in their purest forms simultaneously, and that a variation of the two, whether it be sliding or carving, are how they work together.